A Category 5 hurricane slammed directly into Orchila. Reinforced concrete structures thought to be impenetrable succumbed to nature's fury. In the chaotic moments that followed, satellites captured shocking imagery. Massive silo lids blown wide open, exposing an array of long metallic objects marked with Spanish text and radiation symbols. These were not ordinary defensive launch tubes. They appeared to be carefully concealed nuclear warheads. Intelligence was instantly relayed to military command centers worldwide. On control screens, images were magnified to show every detail. The silver metallic casings, technical serial numbers washed clean by the rain, and nuclear insignias exposed under the sunlight left no room for Caracas to deny. This was definitive proof that La Orchila had been turned into an offshore nuclear arsenal by Venezuela. Inside strategy rooms, red alerts were activated. The U.S. fleet immediately shifted formation. Aircraft carriers cut through the Caribbean waves heading straight for the island. A ring of Aegis destroyers fanned out to the perimeter. Nuclear submarines running silent and deep were ordered to close in. Above E-2 Hawkeye sentries and armed UAVs circled high, scanning the entire sector. The objective was clear, isolate, and control La Orchila immediately. This show of force was not just directed at the island, but served as a warning. Any movement from within the island could ignite an inferno, and indeed the first signs appeared. Venezuelan radar on the island began rotating. Missile launchers erected straight into the air. No diplomacy, no declarations. The atmosphere was as taut as a violin string. U.S. pilots in their cockpits observed the scene directly. On their displays, a cluster of red target symbols lit up. U.S. Southern Command Southcom transmitted a concise order: ready to fire, prioritize, force safety, destroy immediately upon provocation. Each U.S. warship moved its guns and launchers into position. There was no turning back. The net had tightened. U.S. UAVs loitered in the sky, recording every detail as the massive fleet deployed to strangle the island base. On the island, the Bolivarian National Armed Forces FAMBI arranged their formation, rotating launchers and turrets waiting for the order to fire. The sky, the Caribbean surface, and the depths of the ocean had become a massive pressure cooker. Just one spark, one bullet, and the entire region would explode. Radio signals, crisscrossed orders were barked, and coordinates were constantly updated. The U.S. side refused to back down. The forces inside the island would not yield. The situation had crossed the red line. A U.S. UAV swooped low, its infrared lens scanning across gun emplacements and launchers on the island. Seconds later, a streak of fire erupted from the ground. An anti-aircraft missile tore through the air, slamming straight into the target. The UAV disintegrated and fell into the sea. In that moment, there was no longer any escape route for diplomacy. The battle had officially begun. U.S. warships reacted immediately. From the Aegis destroyers, vertical launch systems opened up. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched with a roar. Pre-programmed flight paths sent them slamming into military structures on the island. Above F-35 seconds began dropping GPS-guided smart bombs. Flashes of fire interlaced, but the island's defenses were not passive. Radar systems spun in unison, and batteries of S-300VM anti-aircraft missiles fired upward. Blinding halos of light followed one another across the sky. Missiles were detonated mid-air. Smart bombs were intercepted just hundreds of meters from their targets. The first wave of fire was neutralized. Venezuela still stood firm. In the U.S. command center on the carrier, officers furrowed their brows. The entire opening strike had failed. Immediately, a second salvo erupted. This time, hundreds of warheads flew simultaneously. The sky turned into a rain of missiles, completely overwhelming the interception speed of the defensive systems. Under that terrible pressure, the S-300 net began to overload. A few missiles slipped through, falling straight onto fortified bunkers. Explosions shook the earth, columns of black smoke rose high, and an auxiliary hangar collapsed. Many Venezuelan soldiers were buried. The first losses were evident. The defensive system was no longer intact. Venezuela immediately returned fire. From coastal launchers, Kh-31 anti-ship missiles sped off, locking onto U.S. ships. Close-in weapon systems, CIWS on U.S. destroyers, spun up, spraying a dense wall of lead to intercept. Some missiles were down, but two slipped through. One slammed straight into the hull of the destroyer USS Arleigh Burke, causing a massive explosion. The ship burned furiously, electrical systems were paralyzed, and the crew suffered heavy casualties. Information about the hit was instantly relayed to command. The U.S. side was furious. The captain ordered no quarter given, and firepower was raised another level. B-2 bombers began their run, dropping bunker busters. Fighter pilots simultaneously unlocked weapons, firing rockets and guided bombs continuously. Venezuela also threw in more firepower. From a still intact bunker, a medium-range Book M 2 air defense battery opened fire, shooting down two bombs before they hit the ground. Simultaneously, a long-range rocket artillery unit from the dry island sprang up, firing a barrage of Smerch rockets toward the sea, creating a curtain of fire for cover. The battle turned into a brutal tit-for-tat exchange. Every missile the U.S. launched was met with a Venezuelan warhead in response. The sea around the island glowed with explosion after explosion. There was not a single moment of silence. On U.S. decks, sailors frantically fought fires and pulled the wounded from piles of red-hot steel. Meanwhile, on the island, Venezuelan soldiers rushed into tunnels to rescue buried comrades. Urgent orders filled the internal radio channels. Casualties were mounting on both sides. The U.S. commander tightened his grip on the headset, ordering a full-scale operation. No more testing reactions. This was now a total offensive. Squadrons were divided by vector, each tasked with destroying a specific type of target. U.S. submarines beneath the sea prepared to join the fight. In the command bunker on the island, a Venezuelan officer screamed for reinforcements from the mainland. Urgent cables were sent, signaling the start of a counterattack from afar. The battle space had officially exceeded its initial containment. The initial UAV downing was just the spark. Now the fires of war were burning fully, and it would not stop with just a few opening skirmishes. As the second salvo ended, Venezuelan air defenses were still resisting, but signs of overload were clear. The U.S. immediately increased intensity. Missiles left their launchers in dense clusters. Ordnance rained down like a storm, drowning the entire area around the island. Venezuelan radar alarmed continuously. The 300 seconds fired at maximum rate. Interceptors shot upward, detonating targets, but the volume of incoming missiles far exceeded the ability to respond. A wave of warheads punched through the net, crushing a radar station and destroying 2 defensive gun emplacements. Soldiers in the control bunker suffered heavy casualties. Communications were interrupted, and the U.S. Air Force immediately pushed into the gap. F-35 seconds dove, launching rockets and smart bombs. Venezuelan defenses fought back frantically. Su-30 Mk2 flankers sortied to intercept, and fighters from both sides clashed. Air-to-air missiles tore apart formations. An F-35 took a hit and exploded midair. Immediately after, a Su-30 was down by an AIM-120, crashing into the sea in a ball of fire. Casualties rose by the minute. On the ground, Venezuelan rocket artillery opened fire. A barrage of rockets streaked toward the sea, aiming for the U.S. destroyer formation. Close-in guns on U.S. ships roared, spraying rounds to stop the majority. However, one rocket slipped through, embedding itself in the hull of the USS Mustin, causing a fierce fire amidships. The crew panicked, fighting the fire while evacuating the wounded. Reacting instantly, the USS Ronald Reagan launched a squadron of F, divided by A-18 seconds, simultaneously firing AGM-88 seconds at the radar sites on the island. 2 S-300 batteries burst into flames, the air defense system was torn open, and the pressure of the attack doubled. Venezuela launched KH-31 seconds from coastal launchers. The supersonic missiles sped straight for the U.S. fleet. Agents began locking targets, launching SM-6 seconds to intercept. Most KH-31 seconds were downed, but one punched through, slamming straight into the USS Chancellorsville. The explosion caused the ship to list heavily, killing dozens of sailors. This was the largest counterstrike since the start of the battle. The U.S. Air Force responded with fury. B-2 seconds dropped. GBU-57 deep penetrators hitting a fuel bunker. The explosion ripped the area apart. Dozens of Venezuelan soldiers were blown away. Fire spread to the ammunition dump, and a chain of explosions created terrible overpressure. In the dogfight, a Su-30 shot down another F, divided by A-18, but lost 2 wingmen, unable to escape in time. The sky turned into a maze of smoke and fire with debris raining down. Pilots on both sides only had time to scream before free-falling with their aircraft into the sea. The U.S. recorded heavy losses, 2 destroyers knocked out of the fight, 3 aircraft downed, and dozens of soldiers dead. Venezuela lost nearly half its radar system, a fuel bunker, and multiple aircraft crashing into the ocean. But neither side stopped. From the carrier, the U.S. commander ordered a general bombardment. Squadrons rotated into the fight. Each attack wave lasted no more than 5 minutes before withdrawing for immediate reinforcement. On the island, the Venezuelan commander shouted orders to hold the position at all costs. The intensity of firepower continued to escalate. Interception volleys thinned out. Missiles began impacting targets without being stopped. A UAV hangar caught fire, a logistics depot exploded, and much hardware was wiped out. But just as the U.S. thought the advantage was tilting entirely their way, another KH-31 slipped the net, striking the USS America. The explosion set the entire aft deck ablaze, wounding dozens of U.S. Marines. Blood had been spilled on both sides. Counterattacks followed one another without pause. There was not a second of silence, only a relentless chain of attacks with losses mounting by the hour. The battle had moved beyond probing. This was no longer a warning strike, but total combat, where each side was determined to wipe out the opponent or be crushed on the spot. A squadron of F-35 seconds rushed the formation, launching an opening volley of missiles. Target lock signals flashed red continuously. 3 Su-30 seconds were shot down immediately, shattering into burning debris and falling into the sea. Before they could celebrate, warnings blared in U.S. cockpits. Su-57 felons advanced mercenary fighters from behind fired R-77 missiles. One F-35 was pierced and exploded mid-air debris cutting through the formation. F, divided by A-8 seconds from the U.S. carrier, approached carrying AGM 88 seconds aimed at fire control radars on the island. As the missiles launched, a Su-57 cut across, firing its 30mm cannon. An F, divided by A-18, had its engine shredded. The pilot couldn't eject in time. However, the missile salvo still struck home, collapsing a Venezuelan radar station. A large section of the air defense system was paralyzed. Venezuela deployed a squadron of Su-34 seconds carrying anti-ship bombs toward the U.S. fleet, but before they could drop, F-35 seconds dove from above, firing missiles. 2 Su-34 seconds caught fire and fell into the sea. The remainder tried to release their bombs, but shipboard close-in guns intercepted them successfully. The support mission failed, the squadron was scattered, and the Venezuelan Air Force immediately threw all available Su-57 seconds into the front line. U.S. pilots struggled as their radar was constantly jammed. An F-35 lost signal was tailed and taken down by a volley of R-73 seconds. Simultaneously, a Su-57 was hit by a B-2 hiding in the distance using a long-range air-to-air missile turning into a fireball in the sky. The situation was chaotic, squadrons tangling tightly with one another. Cannon fire missiles and debris flew in all directions. An F-35 had just downed a Su-30 when it was hit by anti-aircraft fire from the island, tearing off its left wing. It spiraled into the sea, costing another pilot. Immediately after, a Su-57 rushed straight into an AIM 120 lock and was blown up before it could maneuver. B-2 seconds continued their mission, dropping bunker busters on remaining targets. Fire erupted from an auxiliary fuel bunker, smoke billowing high. On the radio, a Venezuelan officer screamed orders to shoot down the bombers immediately. A squadron of Su-30 seconds surged up, focusing on hunting the B-2 seconds. However, escorting F, divided by A-18 seconds, intercepted them in time. 2 Su-30 seconds were shredded by missiles. The B-2 still managed to drop its final load. Casualties on both sides rose rapidly. The U.S. lost 4 more fighters, including a B-2 hit by surface-to-air missiles while withdrawing. Venezuela lost nearly 10 aircraft, including multiple Su-30 seconds and 3 Su-57 seconds. The sky glowed with sequential explosions. Burning wrecks plunged into the ocean, creating columns of thick black smoke. Pilots on both sides no longer kept tactical distances, but engaged in close-range dogfights. F-16 seconds Venezuelan legacy fleet turned and burned on the tails of F, divided by 18 seconds. F-35 seconds used stealth to loop behind and lock targets. Missiles fired. A Su-30 exploded seconds later. In another sector, a Su-57 pulled a sudden loop, firing a missile to down an F-35. Both pilot and plane vanished in a fireball. Continuous explosions turned the mid-air space into a burning battlefield. Every minute that passed saw another fighter wiped out, and neither side would back down. Pilots only had time to scream coordinates and the name of their opponent before losing contact forever. After nearly an hour of fighting, the sky over La Orchila was littered with stragglers running low on fuel, turning back to retreat. Both sides suffered heavy damage, but the U.S. maintained superiority thanks to the sheer density of their squadrons, while Venezuela had lost nearly half of its initial fighter force. The air battle ended in blood and fire, leaving the airspace full of black smoke and wreckage scattered across the sea. But the battle did not stop. Below, the fleets of both sides began massing forces for a direct confrontation. From the south, the Venezuelan fleet charged in. Guayquerí, class frigates and modernized destroyers activated radar, their slanted launchers erecting. C-802 cruise missiles launched in dense salvos. The targets were the outer ring of the U.S. fleet. USS Shiloh and USS Lake Erie immediately fired SM-6 seconds. Streaks of light shot up. Interceptors collided head-on. More than half the K-802 seconds were destroyed, but 3 slipped through. One slammed into the USS Chosen. The engine room exploded, killing dozens of crew members. The ship listed sharply, emitting deadly smoke. Reacting instantly, U.S. ships simultaneously launched retaliatory missiles. A wave of warheads flew horizontally, aimed straight at the Venezuelan formation. The frigates fired Still 1 missiles to intercept, but the volume of incoming fire was too thick. One slammed straight into the deck of the lead Venezuelan ship. The entire auxiliary ammo magazine detonated. Fire spread to the cabin, sailors were thrown into the sea, and the wreck burned red hot. Neither side waited for results. 127 millimeters naval guns from the USS Decatur fired continuously, pouring shells directly into enemy hulls. The Venezuelan side responded with automatic coastal batteries and naval guns. Shells exploded around U.S. decks. One hit the auxiliary gun bay of the USS Mustin. Flames erupted furiously. Many sailors collapsed on the spot. The U.S. fleet commander ordered the formation to tighten and concentrate total firepower. All Aegis ships focused their fire. Missiles trailed one another screaming into the air. In reverse, Venezuela sent Vosper 37M missile boats rushing in at close range, firing torpedoes straight into the formation. A torpedo hit the USS Kidd. The explosion tore open the bow water flooded in, and the crew was forced to abandon stations to save the ship. In a brutal counterattack, the USS John S. McCain launched a volley of harpoons. Two penetrated the hull of a missile boat, turning it into a fireball. A column of smoke rose. The entire crew could not escape. The naval battle turned into a minute-by-minute slaughter of tit-for-tat. Venezuela continued to pour in force, deploying Capana-class amphibious ships with long-range artillery support. But they became easy prey when ONTAC by a squadron of F divided by 18 seconds from the U.S. carrier. Two GBU-31 guided bombs struck straight onto the deck. The hold caught fire and the ship capsized and sank. Meanwhile, the USS Ronald Reagan continued launching supplemental fighters. U.S. planes attacked the formation head-on, firing Mavericks to destroy individual targets. Venezuelan air defenses strained to fire back, downing 2F, divided by A, 18 seconds, but losing another Lupo-class frigate to a bomb run. Casualty numbers climbed ceaselessly. Quick reports showed the U.S. had lost 2 destroyers, knocked out of the fight with hundreds of sailors wounded. Venezuela lost at least 3 ships, including a frigate, a corvette, and an amphibious ship. Both sides were bleeding, but neither retreated. The wall of fire continued. Torpedoes, anti-ship missiles, naval guns, guided bombs, all poured down onto the sea surface. Fireballs erupted continuously. Columns of water stood vertical as warheads landed near ship hulls. The entire fleet was swept into a vortex of destruction where every passing minute saw another ship wiped out. The confrontation at sea reached an uncontrollable level. The U.S. concentrated multi-layered firepower. Venezuela committed its entire regional naval force. There was no room left for warnings or shots across the bow, only absolute ferocity as wrecks slowly sank, blood staining the water red. Both sides understood this was only the beginning of an even fiercer battle, because beneath the waves, dark-shaped submarines had begun moving into position. Below the surface, the USS Virginia was in position. Torpedo doors opened and a volley of Macon 48 seconds sped away. Venezuelan sonar detected them too late. One slammed straight into the hull of a Kilo-class submarine moving on the outer perimeter. The explosion tore apart the engine room. The ship sank quickly. Sailors could not escape. A second Venezuelan Kilo-class Project 636 immediately counterattacked. Torpedoes sped out seeking targets. The USS Mustin, struggling to contain a deck fire, was suddenly hit on the port side. The explosion shattered the midsection. The ship broke in two and sank completely. Hundreds of sailors were swept into the sea. In an instant, the ocean depths turned into an invisible slaughterhouse. Submarines on both sides constantly changed course, firing decoys to break target locks, but the torpedoes hunted relentlessly. A Type 209 second Zabalo class was detected by the USS Seawolf, taking 2 Mach 48 seconds full on. It exploded, the entire crew lost to the sea. Sonar blared warnings. The U.S. commander ordered an anti-submarine operation. P-8 Poseidon aircraft were dispatched to drop sonar buoys in suspected areas. Minutes later, a guided torpedo from a P-8 hit a second Kilo-class submarine. An explosion sent a column of water high. The wreck vanished into the depths. While the underwater war raged, orders were transmitted from Caracas-launched land-based missiles. A barrage of Iskander-M missiles left their launchers hurtling toward the U.S. fleet. Warning sirens screamed across all U.S. warships. Aegis activated all SM-3 and SM-6 systems, firing continuously to paint a web of fire across the sky. Many Iskanders were intercepted and detonated in the upper atmosphere, but 2 slipped through. One fell near the USS Ronald Reagan. The shockwave blew away equipment on the deck, causing an F divided by A-18 to explode before it could take off. The second slammed into the USS Shiloh, hitting the starboard side. The ship exploded violently, listing heavily. The crew screamed amidst the smoke and fire. The U.S. retaliated with strikes from B-2 seconds and F-35 seconds, dropping smart bombs on the control radar systems on the island. Command posts were destroyed. Venezuelan air defense communications were severed. However, land-based launch systems continued to fire. A volley of Bastion P anti-ship missiles targeted the carrier group. Aegis strained again. SM-6 seconds fired at maximum speed, close-in guns glowing red, downing the majority. But one missile still punched through, hitting the USS Lake Erie. The ship exploded from its missile magazine. The entire hull split in two, fire covered the sea surface, and the crew perished almost entirely. The battle was now chaos on three levels: in the air, on the sea, under the sea, and from the mainland. Every minute a ship vanished. Every second a pilot or sailor fell. Rapid reports. The U.S. lost two more destroyers, many sailors sacrificed. The fleet took heavy damage. Venezuela lost 3 submarines, a destroyer, and massive amounts of hardware destroyed on the island. But neither backed down. Instead, they tightened the noose. In the U.S. command room, an officer shouted, "Call reinforcements now. We need support from Guantanamo and Puerto Rico." On Venezuelan comms, urgent orders: continue firing Iskanders, force them back. Blood and steel continued to churn. The battle no longer had concepts of opening moves or warnings. This was a total battlefield where any minute could turn into a catastrophic annihilation. Distress signals from the U.S. fleet were sent. Key West and Puerto Rico reacted immediately. The carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt left port carrying squadrons of F-35Cs and F-A-18S. From Florida B, 1B bombers took off carrying bunker busters and cruise missiles. The sky over the Caribbean Sea awaited a new layer of firepower. Meanwhile, Brazil made a shocking decision. A squadron of F-39 Gripen fighters and R-99 early warning aircraft sortied straight for the combat zone. Flying in full formation, carrying Meteor air-to-air missiles and anti-ship weaponry, Brazil officially entered the war. Venezuela immediately dispatched F-16 and Su-30 squadrons to intercept. The dogfight expanded across the entire sector. F-39 Gripens rushed in, firing volleys of meteors, downing 3 F-16 seconds in the first pass. However, an F-39 was tailed by a Su-30 and hit by a missile exploding mid-air. From the west, Colombia engaged. Coastal launchers from the Guajira Peninsula opened fire. Spike NLOS and Nimrod missiles flew sea-skimming, locking onto Venezuelan ships at the rear of the formation. Venezuelan warning systems blared urgently. One missile struck a Ciudad Bolivar-class supply ship. The explosion cut the ship in half, and the fuel depot erupted. The entire crew was swept into a sea of fire. This was a direct hit on logistics, upending the entire resupply plan. The U.S. seized the moment, launching another volley of Tomahawks from the USS Theodore Roosevelt and USS Ronald Reagan. Hundreds of warheads slammed into the island. The remaining Venezuelan air defense net could not hold. Many bunkers were destroyed. S-300 launchers turned into piles of scrap metal. Forces on the island fell into a desperate situation. The Venezuelan Air Force counterattacked madly. Su-57 seconds rushed the U.S. formation, shooting down one F divided by A-18 and one F-15. But immediately, 2 Su-57 seconds were locked by Brazilian pilots. Meteors cut their tails. They exploded midair. Sequential explosions, aircraft wreckage falling scattered across the sea surface. Colombia continued firing. A volley of anti-ship missiles rushed into the Orchila waters. One slammed straight into a Lupo-class frigate. The entire hull was torn open, sinking in minutes. 2 others hit the aft section of a Capana-class amphibious ship. Hundreds of soldiers died instantly. The U.S. reported losses but maintained the advantage. 2 destroyers crippled 4 more planes, down hundreds of soldiers dead. Venezuela's losses were far more terrible. 3 more warships, lost logistics, crushed over a dozen aircraft, down island defenses nearly paralyzed. Inside the Venezuelan command, bunker officers shouted continuous orders to hold the line. Reinforcements were coming. But in reality, the net was closing. The U.S. from the north, Brazil from the south, Colombia firing from the west. 3 pincers tightening turned La Orchila into a steel trap. The USS Theodore Roosevelt launched more F-35C squadrons, dividing into flights to continuously supplement firepower. U.S. submarines fired more torpedoes, sinking a Venezuelan destroyer. The fleet panicked. Distress signals were sent continuously to the mainland. Blood stained the sea red. Shipwrecks, plane wreckage, and debris drifted everywhere. The battle had exceeded the control of a single nation. This was a true multilateral war, where Venezuela was pushed into a desperate defense between international pincers. Orders from Caracas arrived: hold to the death at all costs. All remaining Su-30 and Su-57 squadrons were thrown in, holding back no reserves. The fleet in La Guaira rushed forward at full speed. Land-based missiles continued to leave their launchers, pouring straight into the Caribbean waters. The Venezuelan Air Force arranged a Su-30 formation to dive bomb the U.S. lines. 2 F-35 seconds were shot down in the first few minutes, wreckage plunging into the sea. F divided by A-18 seconds, counterattacked fiercely, shooting down 3 Su-30 seconds. The sky exploded into a chain of fires. On the surface, a Venezuelan destroyer rushed to close range, firing cruise missiles. One penetrated the Aegis line, hitting the USS Antietam, exploding the engine room and killing dozens. The ship didn't sink but was heavily damaged, effectively losing combat capability. The U.S. responded with a volley of harpoons from the USS John S. McCain and USS Curtis Wilbur. 2 slammed straight into the side of the Venezuelan ship. The chain explosion blew away the entire deck. Sailors couldn't leave their posts. The entire ship sank in minutes. Iskander missiles from the mainland arrived. Aegis blocked most, but one slipped through, falling near the carrier USS Ronald Reagan. The shock wave shook the entire deck. 2F divided by 18 seconds preparing to take off exploded right on the runway. Over 10 sailors died instantly. B-1Bs from Florida rushed in, dropping guided bombs on the remaining launchers on the island. A battery of 300 seconds was flattened. The island's air defense force was nearly wiped out. But as the B-1B withdrew, a Su-57 tailed it, firing a missile. The missile punched through the right wing. The B-1B exploded, the entire crew lost. In the south, Brazil threw its entire F-39 squadron in coordinating with the U.S. to create an aerial pincer. Missiles from F-39 seconds shot down 4 F-16 seconds in a single pass. But Brazil also lost 2 pilots when Su-30 seconds counterattacked. Explosions were relentless. Plane wreckage fell into the sea, creating new fires. Colombia did not stop bombing. High-speed missiles slammed into the Venezuelan ship formation. One hit a frigate, turning it into a fireball. Another slammed into an amphibious ship, detonating the vehicle bay. Hundreds of Marines died instantly. Despite horrific casualties, Venezuela still tried to tighten its last stand. Su-57 seconds tangled with F, 35 seconds, Su-30 seconds faced off with F divided by A-18 seconds, F-16 seconds rushed the Brazilian formation. Not a single pilot backed down, everyone fired until the last bullet. When one squadron fell, another immediately filled the gap. The U.S. fleet recorded more heavy losses. 3 destroyers damaged, 1 ship nearly incapacitated. The Air Force lost nearly a dozen planes in just a few dogfight passes. The Venezuelan side was even more tragic. 4 warships sunk, over a dozen planes shot down, hundreds of soldiers killed on the island. The whole to the death battle turned into a sea of blood. Every minute saw more ships sinking, planes exploding, soldiers dying. But the orders from both sides did not change. No retreat, no stop. La Orchila turned into an inferno where life and death were decided in every launch rhythm. In the U.S. command room, generals shouted orders to continue pressuring until they broke. On the island, the Venezuelan commander screamed over the radio to hold on. Reinforcements were coming. But the truth was visible. The circle had closed, and holding to the death meant death. The new airstrike from the U.S. fleet poured down. F-35 seconds led the formation, launching smart bombs straight into the remaining ammunition dump on the island. The explosion tore the area apart. Flames spread to adjacent bunkers. Dozens of Venezuelan soldiers were blown away. Structures collapsed, and the island's defense cracked seriously. Venezuela resisted with a volley of Su-57 seconds rushing into the center of the formation. 2F divided by 18 seconds were shot down, pilots unable to eject, but immediately after 4 Su-57 seconds fell in succession to AMRAAMs and Brazilian missiles, the Venezuelan Air Force depleted rapidly to alarm levels. Surviving pilots were forced to retreat to the mainland for fuel, leaving the sky empty. The U.S. fleet seized the opportunity. Tomahawk missiles from the submarine USS Tucson launched in a salvo, slamming straight into the island's infrastructure. One hit the auxiliary command center. The entire communication system collapsed completely. Venezuelan officers on the island lost connection with the mainland. Orders could no longer be conveyed. Chaos enveloped the ranks. Missiles from Colombia continued to arrive, this time locking onto the command ship Mariscal Sucre. Venezuelan defenses intercepted, but one still punched through, hitting the radar bay. The ship lost command capability, was hit by U.S. harpoons, and exploded. The Venezuelan fleet lost its flagship. The Brazilian Air Force accelerated. F-39 seconds swept clean, the remaining F-16 seconds still in the air. On the radio, a Brazilian pilot reported, "Sky is clean, only ground targets left." F-39 seconds immediately dropped altitude firing missiles into the remaining bunkers. Explosions plowed through the concrete. Venezuelan soldiers inside were buried. The U.S. also paid a price, and Iskander unexpectedly slipped the net, falling near the USS John S. McCain. The ship shattered from the port side and sank in a sea of fire. Over 200 sailors could not escape. Casualty reports transmitted to the command room. The air was thick with the smell of blood. But the order from command remained clear. Continue the advance, do not back down. The island was torn apart piece by piece. The UAV hangar collapsed completely. The fuel depot burned brightly. Radar stations turned into piles of bent steel. Only a few defensive guns fired back weakly before being silenced one by one under the dense barrage of bombs and rockets. Venezuela threw its remaining troops to the front line, holding Eagle man-pads firing straight at U.S. squadrons. An F divided by A-18 was hit. The pilot ejected in time but landed in the middle of the sea of fire. Comrades could not return to rescue him because the encirclement was too tight and air defense fire too thick. U.S. planes dove one after another. B-1Bs dropped volleys of smart bombs, wiping out the last ammo bunker. Surviving Su-32s rushed in, desperately shooting down one F-35 before being hit by a missile salvo. The plane exploded. The pilot had no escape. On the radio, the Venezuelan commander's voice was hoarse. Hold until the last bullet. But in reality, most launchers were silent, defenders were exhausted, the wounded lay everywhere, no supplies remained, no communications, no firepower advantage. The U.S., Brazil, and Colombia closed the final ring. The F-35 squadron led the charge, dropping the final load of smart bombs. Every remaining bunker gun emplacement and ammo depot exploded simultaneously. A massive column of smoke rolled up, signaling the total collapse of the defensive line. As the dust and smoke settled, only shipwrecks, plane debris, and ruined structures remained. The Venezuelan fleet retreated far away. No force was strong enough to screen the island. The entire defense of La Orchila was burning. The guns fell silent. Caracas understood that holding for one more minute meant total annihilation. Emergency orders were issued. Withdraw troops, preserve the nuclear warheads at all costs. On the island, engineers frantically opened deep silo doors. Steel containers holding warheads were hoisted up by field cranes. Each one was loaded straight onto transport ships. Armed soldiers formed a protective ring guns pointed at the sky while U.S. UAVs still circled watching. The Venezuelan fleet concentrated to screen the withdrawal operation. Lupo-class frigates erected air defense missile barriers to prevent U.S. aircraft from closing in. An F-35 dove to attack but was hit by a Buck missile and exploded into fragments. But mere seconds later, U.S. harpoons rushed in, destroying that very frigate. The wreck sank, dozens of sailors missing. B-1Bs continued dropping smart bombs. Tomahawks from U.S. submarines arrived, but were partially blocked by the remaining layer of air defense fire. Even so, many slipped through, hitting the auxiliary warehouse. Flames shot high. Venezuelan troops moved warheads in chaos. Casualties rose by the minute. On the comms, the Venezuelan commander shouted, "Protect the containers first, leave everything else." Loading teams hurriedly dragged metal blocks weighing tons onto the ships. A Capana-class amphibious ship received the mission to carry the top-secret weapons. The bay doors opened. Nuclear containers were loaded one by one. The U.S. detected the anomaly. An F divided by A-18 squadron was ordered to bomb the target directly, but a remaining Su-57 rushed up to block the path, shooting down one F divided by A-18. It was shredded by missiles from another U.S. plane immediately after. That sacrifice bought enough time for a few more containers to be loaded. A missile from Colombia suddenly arrived, locking onto the amphibious ship. The close-in defense system fired, intercepting successfully, but two U.S. harpoons followed. One was destroyed, one embedded in the ship's side, causing a fierce fire. Sailors rushed to fight the fire. Soldiers continued loading cargo. There was no choice but to risk their lives. The U.S. fleet threw everything to block the retreat, but Venezuela fired all naval guns to create a dense wall of fire. The USS Antietam took shell hits and caught fire a second time, forced to withdraw from the formation. In the chaos, the ship carrying the nuclear warheads accelerated, slipping through a newly opened gap. The USS Theodore Roosevelt sent F-35Cs to pursue. 3 missiles were fired, but intercepted by remaining 300 seconds on the island. The next bombing, run by a B-2, was met with fierce ground fire. One B-2 was hit and shattered. The sacrifice of U.S. pilots bought precious minutes for the amphibious ship. As the sea surface burned everywhere, Venezuelan ships withdrew one by one from the encirclement. Some were sunk right on the escape route, but the transport ship and 2 escort ships escaped the noose. In the hold, the strapped-down nuclear warhead containers remained intact. U.S. radio blared continuously. "Intercept immediately, don't let them escape." Missiles fired rapidly, but the Venezuelan fleet accepted, sacrificing the remaining ships to provide cover. A frigate took a missile hit and exploded, but thanks to that, the transport escaped into the distance. As the smoke and fire subsided, the U.S., Brazil, and Colombia saw only small dots on the radar leaving La Orchila. The island behind was just a pile of ash. The most dangerous secrets had been taken away. Final report, the U.S. lost one more B-22F divided by 18 seconds, and one destroyer was nearly useless. Venezuela lost more than half its fleet. Nearly its entire participating air force and island defenses were wiped out. But the nuclear arsenal, the key objective, escaped. The battle closed not with a decisive victory, but with a brutal truth. Venezuela retreated, but succeeded in taking the nuclear secrets with them, leaving La Orchila a massive graveyard in broad daylight. When the guns fell silent, La Orchila remained a blood-soaked battlefield. Sunken wrecks lay everywhere, plane debris bobbed on the water, ruined bunkers smoldered. On radio waves, distress calls rang out incessantly. Both the U.S. and Venezuela suffered heavy losses. But a naked truth could not be hidden. Nuclear weapons had been hidden in La Orchila, and they'd been taken away in the chaos. This information spread through military command centers globally. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff met urgently that night. Brazil and Colombia warned of a floating nuclear phantom that could appear in any theater. NATO issued a special statement. Venezuela's actions seriously threatened world security. In military circles, thick reports were compiled detailing every piece of hardware in the fight, every sunken ship, every missing pilot, every casualty figure, becoming evidence of the most ferocious modern battle since World War II. But behind it all, the real fear was, where are those nuclear warheads now, and how will they be used? No one had the answer, and that very ambiguity turned the aftermath of the Battle of La Orchila into a global nightmare. The natural hurricane had passed, but the political, military, and nuclear storm it stirred up would last for years. In broad daylight, before millions of eyes, the world witnessed a truth. The boundaries of nuclear war were no longer in the shadows.